If ADDIE was explained to you as 5 neat steps in a diagram, I get why you hate it. That version doesn't exist in the real work. Real projects don't move in straight lines. You analyze and design at the same time, rebuild things on the go, and sometimes only understand what the real problem was after the course is already live. Hi, I'm Anna Polly, a senior e-learning developer at iSpring, and I've been working in L&D for over 10 years. In this video, I want to talk about how ADDIE works in practice, not as a textbox model, but as a way of thinking that helps you avoid broken courses, endless rework, and that familiar situation where training looks fine, but doesn't really change anything. If you work in instructional design or e-learning, feel free to subscribe. I share new videos every week. I'll focus on practical thinking, real constraints, and training that works for learners and the business. Also, check out the description below. There you will find links to free guides, templates, and checklists my team and I put together to help make everyday L&D work a bit easier. Let's get started. So why does ADDIE feel so boring or even useless to a lot of experienced professionals? Not because the model itself is bad, but because of how we were taught to use it. Before we go any further, a quick reset. ADDIE is one of the most common models in instructional design. The name comes from 5 phases: analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. At the basic level, it's a way to think through a learning solution, starting with understanding the problem, then building something to address it, and finally checking whether it actually worked. The problem is that ADDIE is often presented as a clean, linear process. First you analyze, then you design, then you develop, everything is documented, approved, and neatly moves forward. That version can make sense in a classroom or in a training program about instructional design itself. But once you try to apply it to real projects, it just doesn't work. In real projects, clarity is partial at best. Requirements shift after work has started, big decisions get delayed, and deadlines stay the same even as the problem itself gets redefined. So when ADDIE is taught in a vacuum, it starts to feel disconnected, like a concept you study in instructional design rather than something you use to actually get the work done. That's usually when teams say they don't use ADDIE. What they mean is that they can afford to follow a clean, linear process. The ADDIE diagram is just a visual simplification. Diagrams are meant to make ideas easier to explain and remember. They're not meant to describe reality in full detail. And they're definitely not meant to be followed literally. When ADDIE gets reduced to a diagram, it starts to look like step-by-step instructions. Analyze first, then design, then develop, and don't move on until each box is checked. In reality, the diagram shows the areas you need to think about, not the order in which work will happen. It's there to make sure you don't lose sight of something important while everything else is happening at once. Once you stop treating the diagram as a checklist, it becomes easier to see which decisions haven't been made yet. For example, no one agreed on what problem this course is supposed to solve, but development has already started. Or that the audience was never defined beyond a job title. Or success was discussed in very general terms, but never translated into anything measurable. Let me give you a typical example. A company comes to L&D and says, sales are below target, we need training. No detailed diagnosis, no clear explanation of what's wrong, just a business problem and an expectation that training will help. When experienced L&D teams hear sales are below target, they don't jump to solutions. They start by asking what's actually going wrong. They review sales data, talk to sales leaders, and try to see where deals are getting stuck. They compare how average performers handle real situations with how top performers handle the same ones. Very often, this is where it becomes clear that low sales isn't a single problem. It might be gaps in product knowledge, poor lead qualification, or weak objection handling. Or it might turn out that sales performance is relatively stable, but expectations have quietly changed. The key outcome of this analysis phase is clear, shared understanding of what training can realistically change and what it can't. Nothing is built at this point, but this is where most of project success is decided on. Once the drivers of sales performance are clear, the team gets specific about who the training is for. Not the sales team as a whole, but particular roles with defined experience levels in specific situations. At the same time, you define what should change after the training. For example, which conversations salespeople should handle differently, which decisions they should make earlier in the deal, or which mistakes they should stop repeating. L&D teams also decide how learning will support this change, including what should be practiced rather than explained, what should be included in training, and what people should rely on tools for while they work. By the time the team is ready to start development, they have agreed on 3 things: who the training is for, what behavior it should influence, and how the business will judge success. When a project reaches development, most of the important decisions have already been made. But that doesn't mean development is just execution. In real projects, this is where plans turn into materials, which is why the team still need to test some assumptions. Experienced teams don't try to build everything in one perfect pass. They work in smaller pieces, build something, review it, and adjust. In a sales training project, that might mean drafting a single scenario, a single decision point, or a short module, and checking whether it accurately reflects how sales conversations happen in real life. Sometimes the team realizes that a typical situation rarely happens, or that a decision point requires more context than planned. ADDIE isn't linear in the sense that you log each phase and never look back. In real projects, teams move back and forth as needed. What helps is knowing which decisions the team can still change and which ones are already set. That's what keeps iteration useful instead of turning it into endless rework. The development stage is also where your instructional design tools start to matter because they can either support or block this kind of iterative work. Teams lose time because storyboards, scenarios, and assessments are created in separate systems. When tools make it hard to bring all of that together, iteration slows down. That's why teams often rely on ecosystems like iSpring during development. The authoring tool is built around PowerPoint so teams can reuse existing material instead of starting from scratch. Existing presentations, lecture materials, and early drafts can be turned into working prototypes quickly, refined in the same space, and then developed into finished courses without rebuilding everything. And because the authoring tool works seamlessly with the LMS, publishing and updating courses doesn't turn into a separate project. Teams can roll out changes and update content without creating compatibility issues or breaking existing courses. When e-learning tools support that kind of workflow, teams focus development on learning decisions and iteration. The implementation stage of the ADDIE model is when the learning program enters day-to-day work. Salespeople may open the course between calls instead of in long, focused sessions. Managers might intend to support the training, but never quite find the time. Some parts of the course might get traction immediately, while others are quietly skipped. None of this means the design failed. It just shows how the solution behaves once it leaves the controlled environment it was built in. I would like you to remember, implementation isn't a finish line. This is where teams test assumptions from earlier stages against reality. Are people actually engaging with the content? Are they using it the way you expected? Are there friction points you didn't anticipate? Implementation gives teams a clear picture of what needs attention next before bigger changes are considered. Over time, you as a learning professional start asking a much more uncomfortable question. Not whether the training was completed and not whether people liked it, but whether it actually influenced the decisions people make in real work. In a sales context, that means looking beyond surface metrics. Completion data and engagement patterns matter, but on their own, they rarely tell you why performance changed or didn't. What teams really pay attention to are behavioral signals. Are salespeople handling the same situations differently than before? Are certain mistakes showing up less often? Are managers referencing the same language or decision criteria the training introduced? Teams compare what they expected to change with what actually changed. They look for gaps between the original design assumptions and how people use the solution. In many projects, this is where teams see that the training solved part of the problem, but not all of it. Maybe the content worked, but reinforcement was weak. Maybe the scenarios were accurate, but the pressure of real deal pushed people back to old habits. Or the problem itself evolved while the training was being built. For experienced teams, the evaluation phase helps decide what to do next with minimal guesswork. Straightening a specific part of the training, adding support outside the course, or recognizing that the learning was only one piece of a larger business problem. And that's what makes ADDIE work over time. Not as a process you complete once, but as a way to stay honest about what learning can and can't do. All right, at this point, some of you are probably thinking, okay, this all sounds nice, very thoughtful, very correct, but we are a real business. Training requests come in non-stop. Everyone wants results yesterday. We don't have time to go that deep on every project. And honestly, projects don't stop when teams skip ADDIE stages. Work moves fast, courses get built, and launches happen. It can even feel productive for a while, but without proper analysis, training solves the wrong problem. Without clear design decisions, development moves fast in the wrong direction. Without thoughtful implementation, good content never reaches people when they need it. When results don't appear, then the same request returns under a new name. And when stakeholders start asking why the training didn't work, responsibility usually lands on L&D. And this pressure on L&D only grows in the era of AI. Once AI-powered tools enter the picture, everything around development gets faster. Drafts appear in minutes, content scales easily, iteration feels almost free. That shift changes the balance of the process. Course creation feels easy, but the cost moves upstream. Weak analysis gets amplified, and fake design decisions turn into polished content that still fails to change outcomes. Teams that get the most value from AI aren't the ones who move fastest. They are the ones who are clear about the problem they're solving, the decisions they already made, and the assumptions they still need to test. In that sense, ADDIE becomes even more relevant with AI as a way to discipline your thinking than everything else is speeding up. Well, that's the video. If you ever felt that ADDIE looks great on paper but falls apart in real life, I hope this gave you a different perspective, one that feels a bit closer to how work actually happens. I'm curious, where do you usually feel forced to compromise, then timelines get tight, and what does that cost later? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if there's a topic you would like me to unpack next, leave that there too. I read all the comments, and interesting questions often becomes topics for future videos. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.